What's up, everybody? It's your favorite Last Man Standing's favorite nerd. Today we are going to look at Last Stand of the Wreckers, and this is the hardback edition. I don't want to waste too much time because this is going to be a fairly lengthy explanation slash review, so I just want to get into why you should get this version if you're a fan. So there's a foreword with Nick Roche and James Roberts. It's awesome. It's a good read. And then there's the book itself. You know, it's all printed just fine. And then at the end here, there's so much stuff, like the layouts, short stories, additional short stories here, and like panel layouts, character profiles, and then all the pinup work that was ever used for the marketing of the story while it was, you know, being printed, script extracts. And then just additional artwork. I mean, crazy. A little bit of background information on Squadron X, which we'll explain in the review, along with a short story. And then just more marketing stuff. And just tons and tons and tons and tons of stuff. So, like, if you are a fan of this book and of this story, which you should be, then definitely pick up this version of it if you can. It goes for a pretty penny, but I got it in store at retail price, so let's get into it. First thing we got to do is we got to talk about Overlord a little bit. A long time ago, and in this book it documents it like a super flashback. Overlord is doing what Overlord does, destroying this planet. We learned that Overlord is a Phase Sixer. What is a Phase Sixer? They're basically a group of Decepticons. Six-Shot is one, Overlord is one, and what their job basically is to go to these planets that are on the brink of, you know, collapse due to Decepticon infiltration and seal the deal. While Overlord is exceptionally good at this, we also learn that he has ambition beyond his title and responsibilities. Any Decepticon with ambition eventually means problems. We find out more about that later, but basically he wants to overthrow Megatron. The question is why. So there's a significant amount of flashbacks in this story. The story itself opens up 3 years ago on Garrus 9, which is a prison planet, and it's under attack by the Decepticon Predator. They're like the G2 Seekers. Overlord shows up, takes control of the situation, kills one of the Predators pretty much as soon as he gets there. I think just kind of to do the old take out a tough guy in the room and then be the tough guy kind of thing. We learn that he's revolting from Megatron a bit. He wants to be noticed by Megatron, and that becomes a big part of this book as it goes on. So then it kind of jumps ahead to 2 years ago from kind of the modern day. We see that now this prison planet, it's so out of control. I mean, the Decepticons are literally just killing for the fun and the hunt of it, just to have something to do. You know, it's boredom and it's dog eat dog. It's Mad Max time. You know what I mean? It's crazy. It's gotten completely out of control. This is not the Decepticons in the same sense that the IDW Decepticons have been, you know, with Megatron kind of leading the flag on this kind of band of rebels. It's now crazy, sadistic villains. Also, during this period, we learn that Overlord is repairing Shockwave. I don't know what he's repairing him from. If you remember, feel free to leave it in the comments. Overlord realizes that Shockwave infected him with a virus, which doesn't allow him, basically, to defeat Megatron. And if Shockwave gives him an antivirus, he'll let Shockwave and his followers leave Garrus 9. You know, and Overlord thinks he's doing for the enjoyment of it. And Shockwave basically tells him, you're not. You only think you are. You're doing this to get Megatron's attention. And it kind of makes him feel a little bit, I think, like a child. You know, his whole goal is to get the attention of Dad. And Dad could give a less about him. And that's almost as bad as being defeated. You know, it just fuels the fire there. So then from 2 years ago, we jump ahead to 1 month ago, where the situation on Garrus 9 is so much of a, you know, inmates taking over the asylum that Overlord is hosting kind of these gladiatorial type events where he's just pitting the remaining Autobots against the remaining Decepticon, and sometimes Decepticons against Decepticons just for his enjoyment and entertainment. And this is interesting because it harkens back to Megatron and his gladiatorial days in IDW and how he fought so hard to get out of that. And now here is another Decepticon hosting that. And just how far the Decepticon cause has kind of fallen and changed and become a perverted version of itself. That is the enrichment of IDW that you just can't get anywhere else. On the Autobot side of things, we're introduced to some Wrecker recruits, namely Rotorstorm, Guzzle, Pyro, and Iron Fist. We're also introduced to Verity, which is the human character, for better or worse. It's not as bad as, say, those 3 kids that were in Transformers Prime, but it's still a bit much kind of for the story. And she's a female. I'm not sure if that makes a difference or not, but I thought I'd be noticed. So the new recruits are training and they're called aboard this ship, and then on the ship we're introduced to the big dogs. And like when the big dogs come on the scene, they're almost like celebrity type figures. And it's Springer, Cup, Perceptor, and the twins, Top Spin and Twin Twist. And they basically let the recruits know that they are going to Garrus 9. They're going 3 years later because the Wreckers are kind of seen as this last resort crew. You send them in when it's just impossible. And I guess it's taken 3 years for the Autobots to realize that it's an impossible feat, so they're sending them in. We'll learn later on that that's not the only reason they're going in. It's just a reason they're going in, but we'll get into that. We also learn a lot about some of the Wrecker characters, including Iron Fist, who we discover is a Wrecker fanboy, basically. Like, I guess he is he's the reader. He actually had the pseudonym Fistatron, which ties back into the Transformer lore and blah, 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 but like, where he used this name to kind of write these journals about the Wreckers, and he was like basically a reporter on the Wreckers. The journals he wrote was called Wreckers Declassified. But he actually, he passes out. He passes out from the excitement of just being amongst the rest of the Wreckers. Being amongst the Springers and the Cups and all these characters that he's written about for so long. We also learn about Springer and Springer's kind of love-hate relationship with being a Wrecker. So many Wreckers are killed sometimes on their first day of battle, or your first day of your Wreckers can be your last, I think is what he says. That he's actually questioning, why am I even a part of a team that just seems to throw their members in front of bullets? Also, because it's such a revolving door and so many are constantly dying, is there any real crew solidarity within the Wreckers to really build a team, a strong team, when so many of them are just dying all the time? They could probably even be more efficient if they could just stick around for a little bit. That's a big part of the story. Thematically is, what does it mean to be a Wrecker versus being an Autobot versus being just a Transformer? So while Springer's dealing with these concepts, a very important kind of thing comes where the ship, it comes across this Decepticon warship. As they approach it, it blows up, and what comes out of it is Impactor. And Impactor and Springer have a very interesting history. So, of course, we're going to learn a little bit about Springer and Impactor and their history and why him showing up at this time seems so significant. You say there's 3 sides to this story. There's his side, your side, and the truth. At least the documented side of this story from Iron Fist tells the story of Squadron X. Squadron X were the Wreckers gone bad, a gang of Decepticon brutalists who left a trail of atrocities in their wake. Impactor was obsessed with tracking them down. It all came to a head on the planet Pova in the Redon Quadrant. The official story goes that the Wreckers were pinned down and Springer was actually trapped beneath some debris. As the story goes, Springer yells to Impactor, "Blast a hole through my midsection. It'll give you the scope you need to fire at them." Impactor puts up a small fight. Springer insists, and Impactor shoots through Springer, and as a result, they are able to take down Squadron X. They lock up the members of Squadron X, but somehow they get loose. In order to recontain them, Impactor and the Wreckers have to finally put down Squadron X for good. And that's how the story goes. The first version of the story that we hear. So as a result of all that, we learn Springer basically had Impactor placed on Garrus 9. So Impactor was there during this whole Overlord revolt. And we learned that Impactor was freed by Snare, who is a predator, basically because these Decepticons are as afraid of Overlord as they are of anything else at this point. And they were hoping that freeing Impactor could eventually help the situation there on Garrus 9. You can tell there's tension between Springer and Impactor, obviously, but the Wreckers are working together with Impactor's knowledge to now go to Garrus 9 and get the job done. They can't do it without Impactor because Impactor was there, so regardless of what problems Springer and Impactor have, they're going to have to get through it because they need one another at this point. So the Wreckers start working on their plan. And the plan is, they reserve 2 drop pods, get through this lattice force field, find Equities, codenamed Prowl, kill Overlord in the process. Steal a troop carrier and get out of there. They follow suit, They get in through the drop pods. Perceptor is a complete badass. Shooting people with, I mean, just not how we're used to seeing Perceptor, you know, but it's pretty awesome to see. I'm okay with it. Like, it's a departure from the character that you know a bit, but for some reason it still works well. But more importantly, Springer's drop pod goes down. So all of a sudden the two drop pods are separated and the plan is immediately flawed. The first rule of the Wreckers is stick together. Second rule, keep calm. Third rule, don't take it personal. Fourth, always focus on your objective. Fifth, stay the course. And the sixth rule is never show sign of weakness. They've already broken at least the first three. They're in trouble. So they landed where they landed, and their team is made up of Cup, Impactor, Guzzle, Twin Twist, and Springer. What they basically decide to do is split their team up, and they send Guzzle and Cup to make their way down into the core of Garrus 9. We learn that they're actually going down there to try and free Grimlock, who's supposed to be locked up there. That is maybe the one thing that could have made this book even better, is that they freed Grimlock and Grimlock was added to the mix. But I'm a huge Dinobot fan, so maybe that's just me. They get to this cell, realize by way of, I think it's Snare, the Predator, who sneaks up on them and basically explains that Grimlock was forced by Overlord to watch footage of him taking Garrus 9 over and over and over and over again, and it eventually drove Grimlock mad. So in addition to Snare telling them what happened with Grimlock, Snare's also able to get them some direction. Meanwhile, Springer, Impactor, and Twin Twist end up getting trapped. So of course, if you're captured on a planet run by Overlord, you're going to end up being tortured pretty intensely by order of Overlord. Now, one thing interesting that comes out of this is while Twin Twist is being tortured, we see that Topspin is feeling the effects of it. And the question is why? Well, apparently they have a branch spark, which we learn is a production glitch. It affects 2 in a million bots. It's an overlapping nervous system, and Topspin and Twin Twist have it. We also learned that Topspin was a cartographer, and the only reason why he joined up with the Wreckers was to keep an eye on Twin Twist, because they're like brothers. And if he looks out for Twin Twist, he's also looking out for himself, so there's that too. Now the other drop pod, meanwhile, is fighting Overlord. Rotorstorm says, Wreckers combine. And then there's like a panel of silence, and then Rotorstorm says, just kidding. It's awesome because of the whole Ruination or whatever it was, the Hasbro Wrecker Combiner that was an abortion. That's why it's funny to me, but whatever. And even though I know it came afterwards and all that, it's still funny to me. With that punchline being said, Overlord has a punchline of his own and sends Rotorstorm straight to the morgue. During this fight, he's alerted to there's a second drop pod. He sends out a message basically saying, anybody who brings me ahead of a Wrecker has permission to leave Garrus 9. You know these Decepticons are not happy on Garrus 9. It's a madhouse. They're going to go after the Wreckers in full force. There's already some Decepticons there with the Overlord, so they immediately start running after. Perceptor sees this fuel container, I guess, which is a little, okay. Shoots the fuel thing and it blows up and it allows them the opportunity to escape. So Perceptor learns that the Decepticons are fishing for the access code to the Equities chamber. And the way that they're doing it is they have Fort Max basically restrained, and they've got all this stuff run into his head and, into his circuits or whatever, and they're just looking through his information, trying to find the access code to get to the Equities chamber. So of course they wouldn't leave Fort Max just hanging there. They get him down, they free him, they make their way to Equities. And what is the Equities chamber? I mean, that's what I was asking myself. We learn it's this supercomputer. It calculates guilt. So it's basically the judge of the trials at Garrus 9. Or at least used that way. To decide whether or not Decepticons were innocent or guilty. And then if they were guilty, they were put in in one of the cells on this planet. What happens if they were 25% guilty or 30% guilty? How did the Autobots react to that? We don't know. But with Prowl wanting to protect that information, I would guess you went away. And the goal that they're trying to do is download the hard drive. So they're in there. And Perceptor comes to the conclusion that the only way to reactivate Equities is to use a spark. So somebody's basically got to die. At first, Pyro takes well, not me, this is not how I die. I'm supposed to die in the Battle of Glory like a Prime. And he fantasizes about himself being an Optimus Prime type character. He imagines himself being Optimus Prime, etc., etc. Like, it's almost a sickness. Pyro even says, I'm supposed to go out in a blaze of glory, sacrificing myself to save a planet's worth of innocence. The grand finale to a life lived well, guns blazing, jaw jutting, outpaced by a 5, no by a 15 kiloton explosion.
and Prime's there, and he's awestruck. And then too late, he gets it. Me and him were the same, we're the very same. You know, and that goes back to what I was saying before, where like it's almost like an identity crisis. It's almost like a mental illness, where these Autobots are becoming so obsessed with Prime. They don't want Topspin to do it because then they know Twin Twist could possibly die, and there's no reason for 2 to die. It's not going to be Perceptor because he's a senior member, he's an important scientist, he's an important part of the Wrecker, it was never going to be him. They start looking at Iron Fist. And this sucks. And it sucks for a number of reasons. It raises these questions like, are we only a part of this team so that we could be disposable? Is that what being a Wrecker means? You know, if you're not part of this, you know, varsity club of Wreckers, you're just, you know, disposable bullet fodder or whatever to get the job done so that the Wreckers can continue being the Wreckers. So while they're debating, I mean, Iron Fist is really struggling with this, and we get to learn a little bit about Iron Fist's backstory. He was a 12th generation pre-war Autobot, constructed cold in 5th Cycle 522. And he says, I have a phobia of rust. I saw my first Decepticon badge 3 days before Zeta Prime was assassinated. I fought my first campaign in the Manganese Mountains, where I spoke to Optimus Prime for the first and last time, and he mistook me for somebody else. I took my first life before the war broke out, and my second the day Megatron switched on the Nightmare engine. And I'm personally responsible for thousands of more deaths because of the weapons I've created. Weapons like liquid shrapnel and Gideon's glue and cold phosphex. Over the years, my 11 closest friends have been killed, and with each death, the pain has taken a little less time to fade. And I hate the Decepticons for that more than anything else. And I would do anything to live my life again. But I like that part about Prime. You know, he's just like this legend, you know, almost celebrity type figure. Like, I saw him once and he mistook me for somebody else. You know, like, we always see Prime as so accessible because he's always the main character in everything that we watch, but like, to like the average Autobot, he is probably like a legend of lore. Like, does he even exist? You know, his reputation is bigger than he is. The conversation doesn't really matter, and Topspin jumps in and gets the job done in order to do it. And the reason why he does it, I think, was to put Twin Twist out of his misery from being tortured under the hand of Overlord. So with Topspin's spark donated, Perceptor gets access to the computer and downloads everything to Iron Fist's brain, because Iron Fist is this keeper of documentation, you know, like he did with the Wreckers, and that's why he was there in the first place. That's why Prowl sent him there. And that's where this story gets really dark. Prowl sent Iron Fist there to download this information. And why is this information so important? And the answer is, it's all the trials that have led to these Decepticons being locked up on Garrus 9. And Prowl doesn't want that to fall into Decepticon hands because he doesn't want it to feed the Decepticon cause as propaganda. So he's willing to throw all these people away just to protect the Decepticons telling each other the truth about a situation. Now, most of the trials are probably legit, but there's probably one or two here and there, might have been sketchy, or just the overwhelming abundance of trials would lead to people saying, yeah, you know what, to hell with the Autobots. So it's all Prowl's thing. So Iron Fist has the information, but they still need to get out of there, and they got Decepticons banging on the door trying to get in. And Pyro actually steps up. Like, this is a death he's okay with, because it makes him feel more like Prime. And Pyro says, trying to save people you care about is the most that anyone can do. And allows the Perceptor and Iron Fist and Verity to get away while he is ripped apart almost within seconds of the Decepticons making entry to this room. One of the side notes of all of this information now being in Iron Fist is that Iron Fist now knows the truth of what happened between Springer and Impactor. And that is, Impactor did shoot through Springer, but Springer didn't want it. Impactor decided he was going to shoot through Springer. Now, they still got the advantage through that, and they rounded up Squadron X the same way that the other story goes. They contacted Prowl, and Prowl said they had to let him go due to some bureaucracy. This planet's under this whatever, they had to let him go. And Impactor wouldn't have it, and slaughtered these Decepticons that had surrendered, that were in custody on their knees, and Impactor slaughtered them. And that's why he went to prison. At the same time, how do you think Iron Fist learning the truth about this story affects him as a fan of the Wreckers? You know, as a fanboy. You know, it's like that veil is lifted. So, on the other side of things, Topspin falling on the sword now kills Twin Twist, and we are catching up on what's going on that side of Garrus 9. Right when you think that Springer and Impactor are about to be killed as well, Cup, Guzzle, under the guidance of Snare, make their way in and rescue the two other bots in trouble. In the midst of the rescue, though, Snare takes a fatal wound. See, like he says his last words, and they're basically like, "What does it take to get Megatron to intervene?" And he begs for his death, and Impactor complies and does him in. Think about that from the Decepticon standpoint of, why wouldn't Megatron show up? Like, these Decepticons are like, they're basically slaves to Overlord. And the whole the Decepticon cause is supposed to be about being free and not being slaves. As a result, of the Decepticon cause becoming so perverted, it's led to this ultimate, Decepticon of Overlord enslaving Decepticons. And that's crazy. It's awesome, it's so full. Anyway, speaking of Overlord, he arrives on scene, and now we start to really get it on. What better way to make sure the party's getting started than to take Guzzle, one of the smallest Autobots there, and just completely rip him in two, which is how Overlord kind of makes his presence known. And, the Wreckers are getting their tails whipped, and Overlord is doing work, and they're fighting and carrying on. It's around this time that Perceptor and Iron Fist and all of them show up too. So now all the stories have converged and they're all back together. The things that we learn through this is that Overlord has already had all the prisoners killed. This ties into some part of the story that isn't quite clear to me about these difference chips. I'm guessing they got them from Impactor. Springer unleashes this barrage of shots at Overlord. And Overlord laughs it off because it doesn't do any damage, but what you find out is that it was the difference chips that Springer injected into Overlord that they were afraid to fire off because they thought it would kill all of the prisoners and ex-prisoners, including Impactor. But with all the prisoners being dead, and Iron Fist knowing the codes to them through the download of the Equities, they fire it off, and it pretty much decimates Overlord. And with Overlord, even in this rough shape, the only thing he cares about is Megatron. He's obsessed with Megatron, and he does not his main fear is not that he'll die, but that Megatron will now show up and he won't be in any condition to fight him. And Megatron doesn't care, And that's the real kick in the head, is that you do all this stuff to get Daddy's attention, and Daddy hasn't even recognized it because Daddy really doesn't care, and that's the nail in the coffin for Overlord. And at this time, you have to realize that everybody thinks that Megatron is dead in the IDW continuity of this time. Everything that Overlord has done has been for nothing. The other one was the nail in the coffin. This is putting the coffin in the ground. But as if that wasn't enough, Impactor transforms and takes one last shot at Overlord, really putting him down for the count. Walks up to him and is about to kill him and doesn't, for Springer to kind of repair that relationship, because Springer in the battle he's hurt, he's hurt bad, he's on life support. Impactor takes that step probably to try to rectify, and redeem himself. But how does this all conclude? Impactor and Guzzle leave. They just leave. They go their own way. They're not loyal to any cause. They just doing their own thing. Overlord is in custody of Ultra Magnus. Wreckers are dead. Springer's on life support. Iron Fist also died of a stroke, which, he's had this wound in his head the whole time, and it's just been inching closer and closer apparently, and then it eventually got too close and put him down. Which that seemed a little bit like meh, but it has to be that way for the Prowl situation to work out. And what's the Prowl situation? Well, all of this was about Prowl getting to Equities. In the end, Prowl has it all. He has all the information, and he destroys it. And that's Prowl's thing. Prowl will kill 1,000,000 to save 1,000,000,000. No problem. That's why this book is so good. Because in IDW fashion, this book makes you sit down and think about, what does it mean to be an Autobot? Is Prowl an Autobot? Is he doing the right thing? What does it mean to be a Wrecker? What does it mean to be a Decepticon? And it's all very different ideologies of one main branch of focus. We learn that how disposable the Wreckers are, even though they're believed to be heroes. They're basically used like a tool, and they're used by another Autobot who's supposed to be about justice and the greater goods, and you could argue that is the greater good, but they're supposed to be about freedom, and that's not very free at all. And then the Decepticons have ended up turning into exactly what they were fighting against, and that eventually pays off later down the line, as we know with Dark Cybertron and then Dawn of the Autobots, from what I gather. That's why this book is so great, because it's about identity. And it's about, what do these symbols, these faction symbols, what do they mean? As we learn, it's really up to the interpretation of it. Because just because you're under that banner doesn't mean you have the same goal in the end, you know? Because the good guys aren't as good as you thought, and the bad guys aren't as good as you thought. It's like that thing about war, that in the end, if you fight for too long, nobody's right or wrong. It's just, you know, everybody's kind of victims of the same tragedy of becoming just willing to do terrible things for the sake of winning. And it just escalates the game. If you don't have this book, you're wrong. If you haven't read it, you're wrong. If you're not trying to read it, you're wrong. It's possibly the greatest Transformers story ever told, ever. I mean, if it's at least top 5. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Till next time, take care.